Transsexuality seems to threaten the most basic order in society, gender.
What would your life have been like if you were born in a different time? Two people, generations apart, will watch stories that capture queer life in the past.
Grey facial fur, which I'm very proud of.
And present.
You may have noticed that I changed my name.
This is OK Boomer, OK Zoomer.
Hello, I'm Flynn and I'm a musician based in Western Sydney. That's where I grew up. And I am a trans man.
I'm Jess Hooley and I'm an advocate for transgender people, and I've been involved in the past in transgender advocacy in relation to Parliament legislation.
In the 1970s, transgender people were rarely seen in the media. When trans people were reported on, like in this old Four Corners story featuring performers from the Lay Girls Review, coverage mostly focused on their bodies and they were frequently misgendered. It's offensive by today's standards.
Every member of this group has a birth certificate marked male, but they all dress as females. All have had their bodies feminised to some degree, and each considers himself primarily a female.
You're losing weight, D.
Yeah.
But only one so far has had a complete sex change operation. That happened 18 months ago. Her stage name is Carlotta, and she's the star.
Love the performance. It's nice, isn't it?
I interviewed her once. She's quite an amazing person. Yeah. She'd be 10 years older than me.
Right, okay.
Back then, the focus was very much on trans women. Trans men were practically invisible. And the reporting was very awkward.
The longing for change. This sketch, an attempted self-portrait by a transsexual, shows his male form to be gross and lumpy. His dreamed-of female body is slight and winsome. Another male self-portrait is weak and effeminate. The female ideal is elegant, curvaceous and confident. The transsexual then is well aware of what he wants, but how does he achieve it?
Even the language is just very different, I think.
I think what we've seen is a documentary from the period that I'm familiar with as a visitor to Lay Girls back in those days. And Carlotta, who's featured there, is definitely an iconic part of our community in those days.
Right.
I can remember seeing footage of Lay Girls when I was a child, back in the 1960s, and I think I had a shock of recognition and realised that I was related to those people in some way.
Right, it's not so different.
Yeah, I couldn't put a word to it. I don't remember the word transsexual then. The shows were actually put on for straight audiences.
Oh.
So they were sort of shows that titillated a straight audience and raised questions about the fixity or not of gender. But of course the language is all probably quite insulting to people these days. They were incredibly brave and courageous. They were exposing themselves to the public at a time when the world was very hostile to transsexuals, as they were called in those days. Transsexuals who lived in King's Cross and did drag shows and did sex work were harassed and bashed and raped. So this is history that shows a very glamorous side to what they did. They lived very simple, straightforward lives away from the shows very often. They didn't dress like showgirls in public. They dressed like, I suppose you could say ordinary women, whatever ordinary women are.
I believe is very, very brave, I think, of these people to perform as if there's not a problem in the world.
Yes, I think they were very brave in that particular time period.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
The state government has made a bold decision to protect transsexuals or transgender people under the Anti-Discrimination Act. The legislation will be amended, making it illegal to discriminate against transsexuals in their employment. People who have a sex change operation will also get new birth certificates.
2 decades later, trans rights had started to progress. In 1996, New South Wales was the first state to legislate against discrimination against transgender people.
Trannies are probably one of the most heavily discriminated against communities in Australia. We've got something like 50% unemployment. Half trannies are sexually assaulted. Most trannies are physically assaulted.
The Attorney-General accepts the argument.
There are approximately 10,000 transgender people in New South Wales, and I think they ought to be protected from discrimination in their employment.
We're delighted that the New South Wales government has recognised its responsibilities and recognised the injustice and the systematic denial of our human rights and is prepared to do something about it at last.
The government will also change the law to cover people who physically change their sex.
The birth certificates legislation will be amended so as to provide to people who have had some transgender operation a more appropriate birth certificate.
Well, that's quite a leap back in time to 30 years ago. The two women that you saw at the beginning of that clip were Adi Griffin and Nadine Stranson.
Oh, okay.
They were, along with me, members of the Transgender Liberation Coalition, which had lobbied since 1991 for legal change. And the success of the legislation at the time was quite extraordinary. It was, for its time, a very progressive piece of legislation. Even though the granting of birth certificates to those who had had operations, or what people would today call gender-affirming surgery, that particular part of the law was very contentious. Adi and Nadine and myself and Norrie, as a part of the TLC, argued that that was inherently discriminatory, that it divided us by our genitals, that it was inequitable because the ability to obtain gender-affirming surgery now runs into $40,000 to $60,000 here in Australia. It's very expensive, so it was inequitable because not everyone could obtain access to that surgery.
That contentious piece of legislation stuck around for decades.
Legislation making it easier for people to change the gender on their birth certificate has passed the New South Wales Parliament.
It was only last year that the New South Wales government passed the Equality Bill, allowing trans people to change their birth certificates without surgery, bringing New South Wales in line with the rest of the country.
I would like to sort of mention the fact too that Adi and Nadine, who were in that Adi spoke very well in that clip, they are not with us anymore, and the stresses that transgender women go through, the traumas that we experience, are often so great that our lives are shortened as a result.
Absolutely.
So you're looking at people who would be amazed if they saw today the progress that's been made.
In 1995, in a powerful display of trans pride, trans folk marched in the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras Parade. And a language warning. While this float was designed by trans people 30 years ago, nowadays the T word is very much a slur.
And here's Tranny Pride.
Whoa.
The Transgender Liberation Coalition.
And they've won their place.
It's the first ever Tranny Pride float.
But trannies are the only people in Australia who get to decide our own gender.
Don't
we
use that
have
anymore.
a powerful statement to make because of that. Everyone else lets their genitals or their social influences determine it. We make decisions for ourselves. We take control of our bodies, and we're the only people in Australia who do it. And that's something to be wonderfully proud of.
Wow, that's amazing. But yeah, I guess I'm not used to that T word. I don't even know if I feel comfortable saying it. But what's your opinion on that?
Well, we came from a particular generation where the trans women who worked as sex workers around King's Cross and Darlinghurst, they bore the brunt of the oppression that trans women felt at the time. Adi, who was speaking there using the term tranny, we all use the term tranny as a way of throwing it back in the faces of those who would insult us. It's the same as the word queer. People started using queer because it was a way of dispelling the stigma of being called a queer, or a faggot or a poofter. So we threw it back in the same way, as if to say, well, yeah, we're trannies and so what?
Reclaiming it.
That float was, I think, the first transgender float. I was on that float and it was tremendously exciting to be on the float. I'd been at the parade before and watched the parade, but I'd never been in the parade.
Right.
And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life to be in that float and to have the feelings of love coming at you from both sides of Oxford Street, from strangers who were blowing you kisses and telling you that they loved you. And you felt 10 feet tall after being up and down Oxford Street in that experience. It was amazing.
Even though the media shone a light on trans women, it would take years for openly transgender men to get the same attention. In 2011, a trailblazing youth-led program called Hungry Beast asked young trans guys how they navigate telling people they're transgender.
This one time I was out and we'd dancing and there was this kind of hot guy and kind of been checking each other out, and I guess things moved faster than I anticipated, and then we were having a bit of a pash. And I was like, do we go home together? If we're going to go home together, I have to tell him,
yeah.
It's an adventure.
If it's just a harmless pash, I typically would tell someone, but in that scenario, it just moved too fast. So I kind of pulled him aside and went, I've got to let you know something, and told him. I haven't always been a dude. I just kind of cut straight into it.
I haven't always been male. I was born a female.
Yep.
And I started my transition about 10 years ago, and now I'm a man. It is funny watching people do the maths in their head sometimes. Like, you can see it on their face and working it out.
I really like that. I can completely relate to that.
Yeah.
Have been out on the town, if you will. And I would be very spontaneous in that way. And, if there was someone hot, give them a little look across the room. But there's always that thing in the back of your head. It's like, what if it gets to that point? I gotta tell them. Being so fearful for their reaction and whether or not they were about to go off or say something really that makes me feel very uncomfortable. I know a lot of trans men who experience this, and there's been many stories of positive interactions in this scenario, but also very, very negative ones, and some resulting in, verbal abuse and sometimes even physical. And it's a sickening feeling to not know where the conversation will go after saying that. And just feeling like you have to let them know it kind of sucks.
I've had experiences of the kind you're talking about, quite uncomfortable ones. It seemed to me that after I came out, passing as a survival tool, rather than be bashed or ridiculed or something like that, it's preferable that people regard you in the gender that you're presenting as.
Yes.
And I don't disparage people who pass for that very reason.
Transmasculine visibility got a huge boost in 2020 when Juno star and Oscar nominee Elliot Page came out publicly as a trans man. Soon after, his character in the 3rd season of the Netflix series The Umbrella Academy also transitioned.
Who elected you, Vanya?
It's, Victor.
Who's Victor?
I am. It's who I've always been.
It was a groundbreaking moment in television and for the trans community.
Is that an issue for anyone?
Nah, I'm good with it.
Yeah, me too. Cool.
Oh, I thought that was going in a completely different direction, to be honest. Yeah, that makes me very, I'm shaking a little bit. There's just the unknown of what's going to happen next.
Yes.
But I definitely think that was a very good representation that isn't a tragic ending. I feel like there's way too many trans and queer people in general that being, you know, their writing, their character always dies, or they always have this horrible ending, and it just doesn't feel good as a trans person or a person in the community at all to be watching that. It just feels like, oh, so that's our fate. Don't you think?
Oh, there's so many negative representations of trans people. And, I mean, you're battling that your whole life. No wonder we hide ourselves.
Absolutely.
And no wonder people are shocked at times when we finally come out and say, look, this is who I am. There's no apologies. This is it, you know?
That's right. It's just not a nice feeling. So I really like what they did there. I think that's really great.
That's quite extraordinary.
From a little bit of mainstream visibility to mass representation online, thousands of everyday trans folks share their gender journeys on social media.
Okay, I want you to know what I mean when I say I'm trans. Oh my God.
American trans non-binary marathon runner and inclusivity activist Cal Kalamia is one of them. Cal's heart on sleeve videos have earned them a devoted international following.
I feel like I said a couple things and now people are wondering. If you're like, whoa, what's up with your super flat chest? I wear a binder. It actually physically hurts me. I mean, when the pain is really bad and like the anxiety is also really bad, I sometimes just like don't go out. Just kind of cancel the plans and just kind of...
Yep.
So I need top surgery as soon as possible.
In this raw update, Cal reflects on life after receiving gender-affirming surgery.
She's so happy.
I'm 4 years post-op.
Gender-affirming care saved my life. This is the battle in courthouses across America today.
It's an issue that's front of mind for so many young trans people today, at a time when trans rights are under threat internationally.
Gender-affirming care is life-saving.
Wow. I just seeing that, it's like I relate to everything that he's saying so much. And it's, I just think it's beautiful, like the progression and seeing how those years have shaped them. Yeah, I just get so emotional when I see any person just becoming them, and you see it in their eyes. There's a look, and you're glowing, in my opinion, when there's that moment of proper gender euphoria. And I think that that's spectacular. When I decided I'm cutting my hair short, the euphoria that I felt when I could just feel that shaved side, and that I couldn't stop feeling it. And I remember having a shower for the first time with that haircut, and I was sobbing in the shower with happy tears, because it was one of the first times that I felt affirmed and alive. And I felt like I was finally coming into who I am up here and in here.
Yes.
From early trailblazers like Carlotta to present-day Hollywood changemakers like Elliot Page, trans folks have triumphed in the face of intolerance and stigma. Let's learn from history and lead with love as we face this next chapter together.
Yeah, and I think the other point to make is, none of these things are compulsory. You do what suits you individually.
Absolutely.